Freedom isn't about feeling better. It's about becoming whole. The awesome thing is that wholeness feels amazing, and it's possible to create long-term peace, joy, and well-being. It's just that the journey to becoming whole isn't always pleasant. Awakening usually doesn't come gently. It requires seeing ourselves in the mirror, facing ourselves with honesty. And we're not always ready for that. That's actually the most difficult part of the process, which is why it happens in layers and octaves, not all at once. Yet even so, we may discover resistance and defensiveness along the way, like kinks blocking the flow of water through the hose. There's a part of you that already knows this, the voice beneath the noise, the knowing beneath the story, the you who isn't looking for a fix, but a return to who you really are. Welcome to Inner Integration. This is why feeling good can keep you stuck. A little over 5 years ago, I was feeling pretty good, thinking I was living my best life. I was traveling frequently, going out, shopping, going online to read comments and interact with my audience. I was on the content wheel, producing week after week and focused on the lifestyle of a content creator. I was also smoking cannabis daily, using microdoses all day long. I rationalized that it helped stimulate my creativity, and I was one of those high-functioning potheads. I'd wake up in the morning and roll over and talk with Mary Jane. She was the last thing I did before bed, too. She was, in fact, my companion and muse for over 20 years. But in fleeting moments of awareness and self-honesty, during the time I thought I was living my best life, I recognized the restlessness. Then as soon as I did, I would go back to something that made me feel good again because I didn't want to feel that. What I didn't realize was that living my best life was an illusion, an escape, an avoidance. It was performance a la Instagram, minus the parts I hid, like my dysfunctional relationship with Mary Jane. At the time, I felt good about my boundaries and my awareness of the red flags of abuse and manipulation, yet I was in an ego-based defense mode, still stuck in trauma loops, which I couldn't see until the collective traumas became amplified in 2020. And when that happened, I moved to a state where cannabis wasn't legal, and I quit. It wasn't a conscious choice. Texas happened to be one of the only sane states in all the COVID madness. It was a small price to pay, I figured, for my freedom. But also, I wasn't really free. Immediately after getting settled there, I went into the survival mechanisms of freeze and flight. What was different were the particular mechanisms I used when I froze and fled. These, of course, were the same defensive strategies that kept me feeling safe in childhood, yet were blocking my healing and evolution in my adult life and relationships. It seemed like there was no way out of the global tyranny, and even though things were relatively better in Texas than anywhere else on the planet, I knew we were in for the long haul. The old flight mechanisms I used to use, particularly traveling, weed, and going out, were no longer available. So I started to drink daily and shut down in order to cope with the crushing reality of what was happening in the world, the loneliness of seeing what most people didn't, a resonance reminding me of my unresolved trauma, which I hadn't fully accepted yet. I didn't realize at the time that I was also entering my 2 big midlife transits, Uranus opposition and Saturn opposition. These both come in our early to mid-40s. The themes of freedom and awakening characteristic of Uranus were highlighted in my life, as well as the structure, responsibility, and discipline of Saturn. Everyone goes through these midlife transits, yet not everyone surrenders. Believe me, I didn't at first either. Initially, I resisted. This is usually when men go out and buy supercars and date younger women, or when women get a bunch of plastic surgery and date younger men, or people think making more money is the solution to make everything better. So I bought a house, went online, and dated younger men. One hadn't even had his Saturn return yet, as if that was going to work out. And I drank, even though I never really even liked alcohol, and until then it was more of a way to connect socially. But it became a daily habit when I didn't know what else to do. Then one day, sitting on my patio, feeling an overwhelming sense of anxiety, I went inside to grab a bottle of cold white wine. As I rounded the bend of the kitchen island on my way back outside, I caught a glimpse of the clock on the oven. It wasn't even noon yet. I stopped dead in my tracks. What am I doing? This isn't me. So I put the bottle up in the fridge and reoriented to do a workout in my garage. Then I got back into the habit of working out. Some days or weeks later, I was looking at the astrology transits that my pre-Saturn return guy was going through. I was trying to figure out why he was so distant and what he was struggling with, since he didn't want to talk to me about it. It was the fawning response, trying to fix the situationship rather than looking inward. Then something nudged me to swipe his chart off my phone and pull up my own. That's when I saw it. I nearly missed this key midlife transit season because I was outwardly focused. So I dove in, learning all about the Saturn opposition and the Uranus opposition. I started to understand what was happening and see a bigger meaning in everything I'd been going through and intuitively sensing but couldn't name. That was my wake-up call. It was time to get serious. I let go of the guy and turn inward. As someone who would often freeze then flee out of my body by zoning out or finding some other external distraction, embodiment was my first step toward liberation. Eventually, I realized embodiment is the first step for the inner work of trauma recovery, because we end up fragmented, disconnected, checked out of the body. Of course, there was an innate intelligence in that response once upon a time. It was how we survived. It was how we felt safe when there was no other way out. It was too painful to feel, so we checked out. This is, by the way, exactly why so many people seem like zombies nowadays. They're dissociated and living in a functional freeze state due to the unprocessed trauma of the recent years, stirring up all the unresolved trauma of the past. So anyhow, back then, amidst my midlife transits, my anxious afternoons on the patio that were previously characterized by the restlessness of resistance began to morph into surrender. I started an embodiment practice. That meant allowing my awareness to settle down in my body, to sit with it, instead of escaping the pain. Eventually, I discovered that the easiest way to get in my body was to imagine my awareness settling down in my body the same way my body was settling down into the chair. I would settle in, then check out again. And when I'd realized I'd drifted away, I brought myself back to center again. And I would do this over and over and over. At first, beating myself up for making it so hard. Something must be wrong with me. I figured I'm doing it wrong. Why can't I get it right? Eventually realizing this was the work, to show up and to keep showing up for myself in every moment, to trust my process. It was a blessing that the COVID lockdowns became an opportunity for me to confront my pain instead of running away from it. Of course, as I mentioned, I tried to drown it in alcohol at first, which only led to further disembodiment, as I wasn't taking care of my temple. I stopped working out and became immobilized in fear. I was caught in the pain of another trauma loop, trying to connect with the person who was escaping through avoidance that made me realize how I was trying to escape myself too. What I had judged in him and others I dated in the past, I was actually doing to myself. It's a lot easier to put it outside, isn't it? My health was one of my top priorities, so it was really shocking to see how quickly I had drifted from what really mattered to me when things got so stressful. That blind spot, which led to self-sabotage, was created by the unintegrated trauma that I hadn't allowed myself to feel and process yet. The Uranus opposition awakening was shocking and brutal because I had drifted from my true self in the years leading up to the global crisis. I thought I was on it. I had no idea that I was avoiding and escaping unresolved trauma until it was triggered up to the surface through the collective traumas. Uranus is disruptive, like a cosmic jolt. Whatever is stuck and inauthentic gets electrified. It forced truth into the places where I didn't want to look. The suppressed trauma became impossible to ignore, but instead of resisting, I finally heard the calling and began discovering where I needed to liberate and authenticate myself. Next came the Saturn opposition, a time of reckoning. It was an inner audit of what wasn't working in my life. And believe me, that disruptive truth is not comfortable. Saturn exposed the cracks as I started reviewing the life I'd created and the business I built up until 2020. Any tendencies toward avoidance or escapism get checked hard during Saturn oppositions, which meant in particular what I was avoiding and escaping in my ego structure as Saturn was transiting my first house, in my relationships and partnerships, since I have my natal Saturn in the 7th house. It was heavy, sobering, and lonely. That was when I realized I had built my business and sense of purpose on the ego-based motivation to prove my worthiness. I had built my not self-worth on external validation. I was doing the same thing in my relationships and dating. It was a reactionary stance to the abuse I had experienced most of my life, and the story I was telling myself about being a failure, not being good enough, not having the right to exist. Uranus showed me what I didn't want to see, and Saturn took me to task. I was confusing avoidance with peace, suppression with strength, emotional numbness with stability, escapism with joy. And eventually, I could articulate a truth I didn't see before. Feeling good isn't always a sign of growth or well-being. Sometimes it's a signal of escape. We're usually trying to fix things in all the wrong ways. There's a reason we say getting your fix about taking drugs, alcohol, or any other substance or activity that distracts you from the feelings. It's about avoidance, bypassing, escaping, and numbing what we don't want to feel. Until the recent years of doing deeper inner work, I didn't realize that coping mechanisms, even the healthier ones like meditation, binaural beats, tapping, etc., are good for maintenance and self-regulation in the moment, but they don't lead to long-term progress because it doesn't get to the root. Likewise, learning and gathering knowledge can be great, yet getting stuck in analysis and data can also be a form of avoiding doing the work. When we know a lot of information but nothing is changing at a deep level, that's where we see how learning can be another form of escape. So let's differentiate between triage and evolution. Triage is when you're in a crisis and you need to survive or make it through the day or a big week, a tough time, by using self-soothing techniques and coping mechanisms that can be really helpful for emergencies. Yet, it's also a turning away from what's causing these stresses and crises. Evolution, on the other hand, is the long game. It's when you're consistently, over time, turning toward the things that don't feel good. You're willing to get uncomfortable and face your shadow instead of just projecting blame on others and collapsing into the shame and self-pity. This requires confronting what you've avoided, escaped, or bypassed. Not all at once, but little by little, layer by layer. Coping is delaying the reckoning. Most of what people think is healing and doing the work is actually just coping. You can keep hitting the snooze button, but eventually you're either going to have to wake up or you're going to suffer the consequences of not showing up. Evolution is being willing to move through the breakdown into the breakthrough. But we live in a world in which people want quick fixes, magic pills, and hacks instead of leaning into the more challenging path of cultivating true peace, empowerment, and liberation. We are the descendants of generations of people who avoided doing the inner work, even though their lives looked very different from our modern technological times. We have more information available to us, and some people are becoming more aware of the problems at a personal and collective level. Yet we're also getting stuck and entangled in those problems, trying to fix them in all the wrong ways. Our default programming is to want the easy button, but to evolve means to override the distortion of that code. Most of the self-help, therapy, personal development, and spiritual industries are about a temporary escape into feeling better without actually resolving the deeper patterns. And there's a demand for that in the market. We are living in a pivotal time in human history, with the convergence of multiple layers of crises compressed into a short period of time. Things that aren't new, but used to be spread out over decades or centuries. And add to that the additional layer of technology, which is advancing faster than we are adapting. This is creating an incredible amount of stress on our nervous systems. Our ancestors didn't have this challenge. They had time to acclimate to new technology. But we are living in the vertical part of the curve. Exponential change. This is intense evolutionary pressure. The alarm clock is getting louder, yet we keep hitting the snooze button. As a collective, we've been avoiding the reckoning, just as we have on the individual level. The more we avoid it, the louder it gets. Just print more money, that'll solve it, won't it? This is why it's so important to recognize the true path to freedom is within. Our personal shadow is what we can't feel and see in ourselves. Then we project that on others. The ancestral shadow is what we can't see and feel in our family, and the collective shadow is what we can't see and feel in the world. It's easy to look out at the chaos in the world and think we have nothing to do with that. It's more challenging to recognize the global themes that echo in each one of us. Everything is connected. The same happens in a toxic relationship. It's easy to call out the abuser or the betrayer. It's more challenging to acknowledge the ways we abuse and betray ourselves. When we want a quick relief from facing the shadow, we turn to the false self, the ways we mask and hide from all the things we don't want to see. This provides a temporary relief. We put on masks and act tough, unbothered, or perfect. We allow ourselves to think, I don't have any trauma. We tell ourselves that we're better than someone else, or we play small to feel safe. There's an essential reframe needed here. Freedom is not about seeking relief. It's about allowing the release. Not escaping, numbing, or avoiding, but leaning into the evolutionary process. This isn't self-help. It's a return to essence. The false promise of feeling better is the illusion of feeling good. In many industries nowadays, there's an unspoken promise. Do this course, take this supplement, use this hack, and you'll feel better. And sometimes you do, temporarily. But often what's happening is you're bypassing the discomfort. You're outsourcing your power. You're soothing symptoms instead of resolving the signal. You're relying on willpower to sustain change. It's like polishing the surface, but never going inward enough to meet the truth beneath it. Underneath all of that is the energetic knot, the root of the pain and discomfort. It's where we find the emotions that haven't been metabolized, the belief that still feels necessary, the payoff that hasn't been surrendered. This work of liberating yourself is different. It's not about feeling better temporarily, becoming more productive, or rebranding your pain as performance and perfection. This is about reconfiguring your inner field so you no longer need the pain to protect yourself or validate your existence. That energetic knot creates the distortion in your field and how you see yourself in the world. It blocks your coherence until it can be fully seen, felt, softened, and gently released through remembrance and integration. Resistance is what holds the trauma residue in place. It's what holds that knot together. Resistance can mean judgment, projection, defensiveness, deflection, numbness, avoidance, escaping, and suppression. These are distorted programs of false security that resist the dissolution of the pattern because there's a belief that it's beneficial, even if it's painful. This payoff, what you get out of holding on to the distortion, isn't usually conscious, so you don't realize that you hold on to resentment to make yourself feel safe, or judgment to alleviate your shame, or busyness to avoid feeling what's under the surface, or alcohol and other substances to numb and escape it all. Liberation is gaining new awareness and being able to feel, see, and presence the pattern without automatically going into defensiveness or collapse. This is easier said than done because the patterns of defensiveness are automatic and primal. We don't see these until we start to pay attention and build awareness. This also requires cultivating the ability to see ourselves and not run away or push it outward to discharge the energy that will lead to the reckoning. When we are willing to see how we've been resisting, not to blame or judge ourselves, but with compassion and curiosity, then we can soften and release the tension holding the program in place. Otherwise, we'll keep resisting it and seeking easy fixes. We'll keep trying to use willpower to override these primal programs, and we'll get exhausted in the process because we aren't getting to the root. Feeling good can be an emotional drug. We chase dopamine, serotonin, affirmation, validation, soothing words and acts, motivational highs, and man, it can feel good temporarily. But these are all surface stabilizers. It numbs the pain, but it doesn't dissolve the pattern. These things aren't bad, but they're not the breakthrough. The real breakthrough is this: you meet the discomfort with your breath and awareness. You listen and notice the distortion without entangling with it or resisting it or correcting it. And you stay long enough for the tone of your truth to emerge. This is the architecture of healing. That moment of coherence breakthrough isn't always blissful, though it can be too. Sometimes it shakes and rumbles. Sometimes it dissolves and dissipates like a sigh. But it always weaves a new structure. You don't just change, you return, reconfigure, and re-emerge as who you've always been before the trauma and distortions. To return to coherence and reweave a new structure is not to repair what was broken. It's not about fixing. It's about inviting reality to rearrange itself through encoded resonance. The you that is emerging is freer from the old burdens, distortions, and stories. Then through harmonic resonance, your experiences begin to align with the new version you're becoming. Then it becomes easier to release relationships, jobs, projects, commitments that are no longer aligned with your new coherence. Not because they're bad or wrong, they're simply not aligned. Then the universe starts sending you new opportunities, connections, invitations, and experiences that feel aligned with your passions and purpose. But if you want inner peace, you must first hear what the chaos is trying to say. There's wisdom encoded in the wounds. There's wholeness encoded in the fragmentation. There's purpose encoded in the pain. And we can't extract that resilience if we reject it and resist it and push it all away. The same is true in the world. It's not a punishment or bad luck what we're experiencing, and it doesn't need to be fixed. When we try to fix it, we go into that fawning response, and then we become entangled with it. What it needs is awareness without resistance or trying to fix it. It wants to be met, felt, presenced, and given permission to be seen, so the tension can release and space is created for the new to emerge. So what's the difference between a hack and a path of wholeness? Most of what we call personal development nowadays is optimization. And optimization can be good for some things, but a lot of times these are just hacks. And becoming whole isn't about optimizing what exists. It's not about hacking a process. It's a process of surrender. It's a release of what's not yours and a return to essence. Becoming whole asks you to stay when you want to escape so you can face it instead of resisting it. To feel what your body was taught to avoid so you can presence it and move through it instead of circumventing it. To face and grieve the pain your ego wants to override so you can release it instead of suppressing it. To release the resentments and regret so you can experience true freedom and your ancestors can finally exhale instead of continuing to carry what never belonged to any of y'all. A lot of what we call healing in this world is actually just managing the discomfort better. Sometimes we need to do that in the moment because it's not the right time to lean in. Yet if we keep turning to coping mechanisms long term, that inevitably leads to a cycle of suppression or projection of the shadow and collapse. Comfort is not coherence. We often call avoidance peace and self-soothing. We call suppression strength and mental toughness. We call emotional numbness stability and stoicism. We call masking safety and authenticity. But here's the truth. Feeling good isn't always a sign of wellness or maturity. Sometimes it's a signal of escape. Why do we avoid the tone beneath the pattern? Because to stay long enough to hear it means feeling what was never felt. And that's scary because it feels like you can get stuck there. So would you like to remember that you can fully feel it without getting stuck in it? Staying long enough to hear it means letting go of protective identities. And that's scary because the defensiveness of the ego and survival programming is like a false security blanket. So would you like to remember that it's safe to release your survival programming so you can thrive? And staying long enough to hear it means transformation. So even when we do want the breakthrough, that's scary because it feels almost like invalidating or erasing the existence of the version of you who went through the trauma. So would you like to remember that you can release the old story while honoring that it was real, it happened, and it mattered? And what happens if you don't presence what's holding the pattern in form? The loop continues. The trauma replays in new circumstances. The field remains fragmented and you don't feel whole. You seek other forms of escapism, avoidance, and suppression, and it gets passed on to another generation. So I want to explore willpower versus going to the origin and why this is so key. Imagine you're standing at the edge of your pattern, the one you've repeated 100 times already in different but similar ways. You can feel the pull to react, to fight, to run, to hide, to shut down, to fix something, to tell people what they want to hear so they'll like you and accept you. And you make the decision without even realizing it's a choice. Your decision is motivated by the program, I just want to feel good. But it doesn't feel like a decision because it's automatic, like a reflex. It's coming from the subconscious. That's 90% of your power, the part of the iceberg below the surface of the water. You can't see it. You can only see that 10% on top. That decision is primal. This is how your defense mechanisms block you from healing and evolving. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These defenses exist so we can survive in traumatic, life-threatening, or intensely stressful situations. There are times when these are the intelligent responses. And because the body is designed to survive, it learns to repeat that response in situations and circumstances when the nervous system perceives danger or life threat. It could be something someone says or does that triggers the same reaction because it reminds your body of the past. It feels like a threat to your existence, even though it's probably not. Maybe it's just someone who doesn't take no for an answer. They keep calling you, they keep texting you, they keep emailing you. You set boundaries. They keep trying to get a reaction from you. It reminds your nervous system of a traumatic event when you weren't able to say no, or there was no way out, and no wasn't an option. Maybe then you blame them, it's all their fault. And then you collapse into a shame spiral, it's all my fault. Then the rumination and Groundhog Day flip-flop between blame and shame keeps replaying, keeping you pissed off, depressed, immobilized, and stuck. That process happens automatically. You don't have to think about it. It happens so fast, you might not even be aware of it. That's exactly why it's so challenging to make new choices after past trauma. Even when you consciously know it's not a life threat, what's happening right now, interrupting the program feels like swimming against the current. And that's not the sweet, soft flow of a little creek. It's more like the rushing whitewater rapids of a powerful river. There is some degree of willpower necessary here, to be willing to recognize that what you're doing isn't working. It's not yielding the results that you want to have in your life and relationships. But relying solely on your willpower to change it, to keep making those decisions over and over again, gets exhausting. You feel like a gerbil on the wheel. And in moments of weakness, you might want to give up because you're doing so much work but not getting to where you want to be. This is why willpower isn't the full answer either. So how do you reprogram those automatic reactions so you don't have to keep using your willpower to sustain the new way? We have to go back to the origin of the imprint. When did it first start? When did you learn that this reaction makes you feel safe? It's going to be something in childhood, a memory you might not even remember until suddenly it surfaces from your subconscious upon conscious inquiry. So it's not about thinking and doing a mental inventory. It's about getting into a relaxed state, connecting with your body so the memory can spontaneously surface from your subconscious. Now, if your mind goes first to an adult experience, you're identifying a resonance of the original imprint. It certainly reminds you of something in childhood, but that's also not where it started. Your adult experiences are valid, they matter too, yet as a resonance of the original imprint. If your mind wants to focus on the adult experiences, this is also a defense mechanism blocking you from accessing the more vulnerable emotions, which are imprinted on your inner child. The part of you that just wants to feel better, that's the inner child. That pain and those unmet needs are where all addictions come from. When we don't tend to our inner child and only work with the adult relationships, the pattern keeps persisting because the original imprint is still there. As adults, when we just want to feel better, instead of allowing ourselves to lean into the discomfort, to feel the feelings, to process them and honor the experience, we're letting the inner child drive instead of taking care of the child as a responsible, loving adult. This is a form of self-abandonment, self-neglect, self-rejection, or self-betrayal. Yet it's easier to project. So instead of facing the vulnerability, we often blame others for abandoning, neglecting, rejecting, or betraying us as adults. That part may be true too, but remember, there's no empowerment in the story of what they did. That just keeps us stuck in the victim consciousness. The empowerment and liberation comes when we recognize why we keep doing the same dysfunctional habits, why we keep tolerating the same kinds of treatment from others. It's not because something is wrong with you. It's not that you need to be fixed. A long time ago, your defense mechanism made you feel safe in an unsafe environment or scary experiences when you were a helpless little kid with no way out of your situation. You didn't have any other resources at the time. It wasn't your fault. It was the intelligent thing to do at the time. Yet now, it's becoming an obstacle to what you really want in life. When you can recognize what happened in childhood and name it, a new level of self-compassion swells up in your chest. Go ahead and connect with that area now and within your heart center. You can place a hand there. Would you like to know that it's safe to remember where this pattern came from? And if there's resistance there, notice what it is. What does it say? What does the resistance feel like? And would you like to remember how to release the resistance holding this pattern in place? Would you like to remember that you have the power to change it now? If you're present with the feeling surfacing, you can let yourself cry and grieve it, now with new awareness and self-compassion. Would you like to remember that you can feel those painful feelings without getting stuck in them or blaming yourself? Would you like to remember that you can release the old self-blame, judgment, and shame around that pattern too? And would you like to remember that you're allowed to forgive yourself for abandoning, abusing, betraying, neglecting, or rejecting yourself, and that this was simply the result of the old pattern? with less tension holding that pattern. Maybe you notice a softening. Maybe you start to see the gifts emerging. Would you like to remember that you can keep the learning and the wisdom from those experiences without having to hold on to the pain? As you metabolize and process the emotional residue, you're creating more space and stillness. This allows for something new to enter. New insights, intuition, creativity, imagination. This is where the breakthrough comes. Would you like to remember what inner stillness feels like and that it's safe to slow down? From a state of inner spaciousness and expansion, it's easy to see the new possibilities, the new choices you can make. Would you like to remember how to create more inner space? What do you notice in your heart and chest when there's more space? It's easier to make new decisions when you're free from the old imprint that was keeping you locked in the repetition loop. You don't have to rely on willpower to keep cutting the weeds when you can pull the roots and plant something new in its place. The repetition loop can only exist in the darkness, in the absence of your awareness. When you become aware of it and presence it without resistance, the old timelines can collapse. When you're not aware of it, that timeline will collapse you into a state of defensiveness, and the old trauma loop replays. When you're aware of it, but holding on to the resistance, that pattern will amplify in an attempt to help you feel the tension of holding on so you can release it. Now here's the cost of skipping the inner work. When you bypass the discomfort, you also bypass the breakthrough. The loop keeps looping, the pain keeps echoing, and you stay exactly where you've always been, maybe slightly more regulated, or able to regulate yourself faster if you're using healthier coping mechanisms, but still not free because coping is not freedom. When we collapse into a state of defensiveness, our immune system shuts down, our energy field contracts, and we get trapped in the survival brain, losing access to higher faculties of consciousness like creativity, insight, imagination, and intuition. When we get flattened into a gray, materialistic world of self-preservation, we forget who we really are, and we feel disconnected from ourselves, the creator of all that is, and the world around us. When we get used to collapsing into a defensive state, we keep spinning in the repetition loops of the past, including our personal stories, as well as our ancestral inheritance. And that's exactly how history keeps repeating in our world at a collective level too. We're often caught in the very same loops as those who came before us, each of us in our own unique ways. Then we look around us and we find someone or something to blame it on, or some way of escaping it, because that's the quick discharge of temporary relief. But those loops keep happening, the past keeps repeating, and there's no real freedom in that story. Yet the opportunity to turn toward a new horizon is always there. Would you like to remember that each moment is a new opportunity to face the pain so you can break through? If you're still listening to this episode, you're here to liberate yourself. You're not here for a shortcut. You're here to break the pattern completely. That means you'll cry, you'll remember, you'll dissolve, and you'll become. And then you'll begin to hear the tone of your essence. And that cannot be lost. Not to grief, not to trauma, not to time, not to anyone or anything else. It's always there, just under the layers. Why is the tone so hard to hear? We avoid the tone beneath the pattern, not because we're weak, but because we've been taught that feeling deeply is dangerous. So if you're still feeling some resistance, let's name what you might be feeling. What if I get stuck there? Well, presencing isn't about getting stuck. It's about creating the space to feel and process what's there. And it's the only way through. When I was really sick 25 years ago, I had chronic pain in my gut and an intermittent stabbing pain in the left side under the rib cage. When that acute pain would come on, it was paralyzing. It made me want to hold my breath and freeze, but that didn't make it go away. It only got worse. Eventually, I learned that the only way to get through the pain was to breathe slowly all the way into the epicenter of it, then exhale. And I would do that over and over again. Of course, at the time, I didn't have all the tools I have now, but I had already intuited how to presence the pain. Another resistance might be, what if I lose who I've been? Well, you're not losing your old self. You're shedding an outdated version of you so you can integrate the gifts and learning. The truth doesn't undo you. It doesn't erase your existence or the existence of the parts of you that suffered. It unmasks you so you can discover who you really are underneath all the distortions. When I realized I needed to leave YouTube and social media so I can turn inward and do deeper trauma integration, I was afraid of losing my old self. I wanted to heal and grow, but part of me felt like that would mean that that old version of me didn't matter and didn't exist. I started hearing the word shedding through synchronicities and realized that was the process I was going through. I was shedding the old masks, the ego-based performance, the parts of me that needed external validation to validate my existence. But underneath those layers was the real me. And another resistance might be, what if forgiving or letting go invalidates my pain? You can validate yourself and release the pain. Forgiving yourself and others validates that your story mattered enough to set yourself free. Would you like to remember that it's safe to release the pain? Would you like to remember that forgiveness is the highest form of protection? There have been many times when I wasn't ready to release resentment and forgive someone who hurt me. Now, I don't mean to reconcile the relationship, I just mean forgiveness, the act of setting myself free from carrying that burden and tension so I could experience peace. That's why before forgiving, it's important to release the resentment and specifically name what it is that person did to cause you pain. Not to them, you don't have to talk to them, but as if they were standing in front of you in your mind's eye. Then you can consciously release yourself from the obligation of carrying their stuff forward with you. Once the resentment is released, you already feel lighter, and the forgiveness just happens naturally. So how do we transmute the dissonance into coherence? How do we choose coherence over collapse? Collapse is a reflex. It's what the nervous system does when it hits a resonance it can't regulate. It's like a fall into an energetically flattened version of who you are. You either literally collapse and shut down, which is the freeze response, or you collapse into defensiveness, which is like reacting instead of responding, the fight, flight, and fawn. Or you collapse into it by outsourcing your power to fear, blame, or overwhelm. Collapse is not weakness. It's a signal. It means your field has become incoherent. There's dissonance. Integration is needed. The dissonance is coming from the past. Yours, your ancestors, the collective, what you're tapped into in the collective. It may be many layers, all filtered through your field. This is why we need to go back to the origin. Otherwise, the old resonance keeps repeating in current events. Coherence is choice. It's the act of staying present, even when the spiral compresses and it feels like there's no way out. There is, but the only way out is through. To choose coherence means you witness your trigger without entangling with it. You name and feel the emotion without becoming it. You stay with your breath, your boundaries, and your body, even when the memory, the fear, the grief, or the shame return. Coherence is not calmness. It's alignment through sensation. It's a stillness that sets in as you shift into a new resonance. Collapse says, This is too much. I'm gone. Coherence says, this is a lot and I'm staying. This too shall pass. So why does it matter? Because in the exact moment your system would loop again into those same old trauma loops and the past would repeat again, coherence offers a new path. Instead of a downward spiral into collapse, you spiral up into expansion. Not because the pain instantly disappears when you notice it, but because you stayed long enough, you breathe deep enough into it for it to reveal its tone, its message, its need. You stopped fighting it. You stopped running away from it. You stopped trying to fix it. You listened through the silence. For many people, it's challenging to stay long enough to reveal the tone, to bring presence in order to shift the pattern. We usually feel a compulsion to distract ourselves, and one of the main escape devices is the cell phone. If you want to create space for presence and listening, put your phone up in another room and keep it on silent. If you leave it near you, you'll notice your body has a compulsion to reach for it, even if it's on silent and even if it's face down. The cell phone has quickly become the #1 addiction around the world in the last decade. People are co-regulating with their device more than with other humans. People are also avoiding self-regulation by reaching for the phone instead. Babies born in the post-smartphone era are not receiving a healthy emotional attachment with the mother when she's on her phone instead of being present with the baby. The crazier things get in our world, it's normal that people are looking for what makes them feel good. Yet that usually means avoiding, escaping, and bypassing the leaning in that's necessary to shift from collapse to coherence. That's how feeling good becomes an obstacle to breaking free. And not just for us individually, but also collectively and for future generations. Our personal patterns affect the whole. Remember the difference between triage and evolution. There's a time for each one, but confusing relief with healing long-term is continuing in the trauma loops. Healing is not born from relief, but from right relationship with discomfort. It doesn't mean you always have to feel uncomfortable either. It just means being willing to lean into the discomfort that's in the path of your breakthrough. Coherence doesn't mean comfort. It means clarity and alignment. It means staying long enough to feel what you were never allowed to feel, without resistance, without collapsing. It means releasing the security blanket of your defense mechanisms and realizing that it wasn't really safety after all. It was at the time, and yet it no longer serves you because you want to thrive. Coherence leads to long-term peace. Remember, you are not your wound. You are not your fear. You are not your patterns. You are not even your pain. You are the tone, the voice, the expression that is trying to sound beneath it all. Let it rise. Let it emerge. Healing isn't about feeling better. It's about becoming whole. And that feels amazing. It means standing in the echo of your own unraveling and not flee from it. To listen, not to the noise of your compulsion to cope, but to the tone of your remembering. There's a voice beneath the story, a spiral beneath the struggle, a song that was silenced before you had words, and it is still singing. That is your essence. Feeling good is not the goal. Feeling is. Presence is. Return is. This world taught you that strength was suppression, that peace was numbing, that healing was hiding, that stoicism was maturity, but you are not here to hide, to numb, to avoid, to pretense. You're here to name the distortion and to stay long enough for the pattern to shift so you can become who you really are. As the world is getting more noisy, we are being called to listen more deeply. The louder the storm outside, the greater the stillness required within. You are not your pain. You are the tone that was trying to sound beneath it all. And if you stay, if you breathe, if you witness without collapsing, you will hear it, your true coherence. It'll emerge from the stillness, and it will not be loud. To awaken is not to escape pain, but to become coherent through it. Coherence is born from presence. Coherence over collapse. Evolution over escape. Presence over projection. Healing not as a self-help strategy, but as a spiral of soul return. If this spoke to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path, someone who's ready to go deeper, beyond the surface of healing and into true integration. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, or if you'd like to be a guest in the podcast and go through a personal or ancestral integration session with me to share with others, you'll find a link in the show notes where you can do that. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are. The world needs your wholeness, now more than ever. You are not the wound, you are the medicine. Let your trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration podcast. Remember this, you are not broken. You are not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour. It was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.